sometimes you think about what is modern, you know. If you talk about modern, then you can find, let's say, within the structure of urbanity, let's say, or city development, a lot of interesting developments in the past. And past means even you go to the antique and you can find structures there which are interesting, and you can say, my goodness, that's modern. And then nowadays we have the so-called modern time. We have since Renaissance the so-called modern movement as well. And then we have the so-called, since beginning of the last century, we have the so-called classical modernism. And the classical modernism is, from my point of view, very much concentrated on movement like the art, the architecture, and other kind of development, which is very much related to Bauhaus or to form follows function. And again, I would say the radical part of it, cutting with the past and looking for a positive, interesting future, but not always based on the structure of the past, you know. You want to do something new.
牵五小节走 1, 2, 3
Peut-être que la modernité ne concernerait pas vraiment le style, mais plutôt l'expérience. Ce que vous voyez ici est un puits vieux de 250 à 300 ans. Pour sa construction, on a utilisé une technique rare de fabrication de briques nommée bagua. Toutefois, ce n'est que dans nos mémoires trompeuses que survivra ce puits, puisqu'il sera bientôt soit démoli, soit préservé et relocalisé loin de son site original. En fait, ce n'est pas seulement l'ancien puits qui sera extirpé du site. Un sort similaire attend le sanctuaire familial. La famille a fait appel au bloc divinatoire pour demander aux ancêtres s'ils étaient d'accord que la maison soit démolie et le sanctuaire déplacé. Des membres de la famille ont reposé la question à maintes reprises avec toujours la même réponse. Yinbwe, qui veut dire non. Il faut toujours croire au miracle. Seuls quelques membres de la famille s'efforcent de préserver l'héritage ancestral. Yang Zongyin a même puisé l'eau du puits pour préparer le thé qu'il a offert au parrain du conseiller municipal, un ancien lieutenant. Bien que le lieutenant était à la retraite, il était toujours très actif et prêt à aider. Yang souhaitait obtenir son soutien afin de plaider auprès des fonctionnaires pour sauver le puits. « Le thé a bon goût », dit le lieutenant. « Bien sûr, c'est un monument important. Je vous aiderai dans votre démarche. » Ils ont tout essayé. Même le maire actuel avait fait la promesse de sauvegarder le puits à son lieu d'origine durant sa campagne électorale. Pourtant, il s'avère maintenant que seule la façade de l'ancienne maison ne sera pas touchée. Les autres parties seront démontées puis réassemblées ailleurs. Il a été décidé qu'une piscine sera construite sur le site. Nous sommes en train de perdre un des témoins les plus importants de l'histoire des colonies de peuplement. L'évidence d'activités multiethniques qui se sont tenues sur l'île au XVIIe siècle.
第二步谁弹？是你哈，跟被就当他弹扣的时候，是你跟他们要再一次。
Originally, there were plans for something else here on the top of the hill. But the main architect at the time, which was the state architect, Guðjón Samúelsson, he came also up with ideas, and others came up with ideas to have a church here on top of the hill instead of this sort of cultural center that was supposed to be here. There was always in the original plans an idea to have a church in the middle, and then sort of Middle European idea of a cultural square around the church, like you would see, for example, in Denmark and other places. In the end, it was decided to build only a big church here, which ended the plan that was originally accepted, and it caused a lot of discussions in Iceland at the time, whether it was appropriate to build a church of this magnitude, especially at the time that it was planned, because the original plans were before the Second World War, and after the Second World War, the nation was very poor. So there was a lot of discussions whether it was appropriate to build a building of this magnitude at the time, which was of course a very, very big plan for a poor nation at the time after the Second World War. Of course, there's a very big church. The organ here is the biggest one in Iceland. It has more than 5,200 pipes, 70 voices. So it's a very big organ. But because this is the biggest church in Iceland, so it's sort of this. A lot of focus is on music and art in the church itself. But of course, music plays a very, very big and very important part in Christian liturgy. So it's very important, of course. Yeah. So the organ was actually not originally conceived by the architect. There was this big window here that was originally supposed to be very visible from the church, but then it was decided to build this huge organ, and which is of course a centerpiece after, and a sort of centerpiece in the church. So the church actually, the architect, he died, I think, sometime in the 1950s, and so he never witnessed the final stage of this building.
S'agit-il d'un documentaire? Je ne sais plus. Ce que je sais, c'est qu'il ne s'agit pas d'un voyage, mais d'une quête d'images. Ce que nous voyons là résonne en nous tel un triste souvenir. C'est comme se retrouver sur une autre planète, à la recherche de son identité. Qu'est-ce que vous échangeriez avec votre propre imagination? Le poids du monde ou la nuit profonde?
Every period of time and history suffers, you could say, from a modern moment. That means a moment of crisis or reckoning in which it becomes self-conscious as a period. But this is to view the modern ahistorically, almost as a category. Looking back into history and understanding that modernity has happened so many times relative to the stages proceeding of material, and here we have the distinction of the traditional town and the modern town. Okay? Variety, you have relative to the traditional town, for districts, for streets, for plots, for form, but less for materials. That means you have basically one and the same kind of building materials, street materials, physical materials, and so on. Whereas for the so-called modern town, the biggest variety here occurs from materials. And the materials within the buildings, within the units of the urban condition, tend to compete with each other, trying to get attention, the one and the other, being competitive, what is kind of decreased in the importance of variety on the streets, roads, and so on. This is completely different. The one ends here up, another one begins there. What miss out? Something what you understanding of time. It's in German, I'm going to translate what you see here. Written as identities of time. It's not so very difficult to understand. It's a distinction of four different spaces, anthropological spaces, which are firstly
Pourquoi les bâtiments en métal ondulé que l'on voit en Islande sont-ils si attirants, alors que d'autres bâtiments fabriqués avec les mêmes matériaux sont si laids? Il s'agit là en fait d'une fausse question. Le vrai défi pourrait être: comment peut-on se réveiller et s'enthousiasmer devant l'état actuel des choses? Cela ne serait-il pas un peu comme prétendre quelque chose que vous n'êtes pas? Plan des habitations familiales de Taïwan. La conception des maisons des Taïwanais est limitée du point de vue économique. La configuration de la chambre principale, de celle des enfants et de la pièce tatami est essentiellement pensée par l'industrie de l'immobilier. La formule homogène des plans d'aménagement impose les critères qui définissent ce à quoi doit ressembler l'organisation du chez-soi et de la famille.
That's my ground, and on the other side we have a small place. I will show you from the other side also. It's a special offer. For €1.50 you can, I will take your suitcase yes, to the other gate.
Platform?
And also we have the possibility to make a chorus for people who will come. If the mother-in-law will go, you can get a special jubel chorus. But it's a joke, okay?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Traveling, only traveling is life. Life is to travel. Or you have changed something. Only here and now. The idea to make an house for people who are coming worldwide and to make seminars and workshops was very old in my heart. And my story is I have had my life assurance and I got money to realize this, and then someone was not so nice to me and took my money away. So my dream was gone, but not in my heart, and so I looked for another place, and it was the station. It was not a plan to take a station.
My name is Noura. I am Iraqi and I have moved out of Iraq in 2006 with my family because of the war threat. And I lived in Jordan for around 11 years. And in the University of Jordan, I studied for 5 years a program in architecture. And then I developed an interest in architectural and cultural heritage preservation, because to me architectural heritage represented the cultural identities, and by preserving that, I believe that we can preserve who we are and we can understand our ancestors and our culture in general, so we can develop furthermore in the present and in the future. Why this school? When I read about it, that first of all, it's related to the Bauhaus, and the Bauhaus was the place where it started the idea of modernism in architecture. And to me, it was very interesting to study the cultural heritage at the place where modernism actually started, because for many people, modernism was a detached idea from culture. They mainly were interested in industrialization and like the minimal elements, and they were more or less not so related to the past or the previous ideas of culture and heritage. And to me, it was really interesting to study what the idea of Bauhaus as modernism, and also to study the ancient civilizations, and also to study the history and heritage behind it. And to understand both of those ideas, I thought that I could develop an understanding of both what the modern ideas were and what the ancestors also thought. My plan, well, it depends on the opportunities I get, first of all. But my plan in general, I'm also really interested in the international cultural heritage. I had an idea for my thesis to actually start something with the modern technologies to be able to document the international cultural heritage, and to ask people themselves to actually document it online, the way we document in Wikipedia the international knowledge, and by referencing it. But I thought it would be really interesting to ask people to tell their stories and to tell their collective memories to the world. So in a way, we have a sort of an archive for people's lives in certain eras and in certain times. Also, my interest would be, if I ever get the chance to go back into Iraq, is to actually work on these cultural sites and sites of heritage, because I know that back there they don't only lack the resources, but they also lack people interested to work on these sites. They also lack the organization, because there's so much corruption, and there is no much care about those sites, about how to preserve them. I mean, Iraq has remains and ruins from the most ancient civilizations. Mm-hmm. I mean, in Mesopotamia they had Assyria, they had Babylon, and they had so many civilizations. And I think it would be really interesting if I can go back there and contribute even a little bit to preserve this culture and to bring it back to the world, because since like the 20s or 30s, not many archaeologists have been able to go there and work more on it.
The book the work on the book started with the issue of Flaneur in 2016. We went to Moscow, and after we made the issue there, I spent some more time there. I came back to Moscow around 7 times or something between 2016 and 2018. Mm-hmm. And the place that I got kind of fascinated with, or that I returned to most often, was the Boulevard Ring, which is kind of the first ring of the Moscow city. So it is built through the different rings and different prospects, which is the streets leading out of the city or leading into the city. Yeah. And the Boulevard Ring is somehow also like it's in the city center, so it means that there is it's part of a public space, let's say, which is not very reflective of the reality of that most people live in Moscow. Yeah. But nevertheless, I think it is a space that has often functioned as a political space, as a meeting space, as a fictional space in some ways. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the real public space, because in the Soviet Union there was no public space in that sense that is accessible for people, that it's can be shaped by people. So the most of what we would call public space in the sense of social space would be inside the building. So it could be the corridor of the communal living space, or it could be the hallway. The outside is different. The outside is an orchestrated space. It's a space controlled by the power, and it's a space that is also very functional in the sense that you leave the house, you go from A to B, but there's no participation in that space. Now, of course, things in Moscow have changed, but still it remains somewhat an orchestrated city, Moscow. The movement on the ring was particularly interesting because the book is basically based on the idea that I'm circling the same road again and again. It's actually 10 different boulevards connected. And for me, this movement was interesting because the ring is actually not a ring. Different boulevards, there is the Moskva River, but it's the idea of a ring. It's not a ring, actually. For me, the movement is connected to a false promise. So we are circling this boulevard ring. But actually, it's impossible. Actually, we get lost.
Rénovation urbaine actuelle. Nous pouvons sentir la présence d'une distorsion délibérée du sens de la modernité dans l'approche de l'aménagement urbain de Taïwan. La modernité signifie se libérer des contraintes de la tradition et de l'autoritarisme pour s'orienter vers la liberté. Cela va à l'encontre d'un mode régulé de développement environnemental. En d'autres mots, la modernisation est devenue pour les autorités et les firmes de construction engagées dans le développement urbain l'excuse par excellence pour justifier toutes leurs mauvaises décisions. Dès que Chiang Kai-shek et ses troupes ont débarqué à Taïwan, ils ont entrepris une vaste campagne de démolition des lieux de culte japonais dédiés aux déités shinto et les ont transformés en sites de commémoration des martyrs du KMT. Le sanctuaire a survécu. Les lanternes, le chien de pierre ainsi que le piédestal sont encore presque entiers. Ainsi, certains objets et bâtiments n'ont pas été détruits par le KMT. Sans doute parce qu'ils sont moins iconiques du Japon que d'autres. C'est le cas avec le sanctuaire Shinto de l'eau du Yuanshan. Toutefois, progressivement, tout se perd.
kekuatan ekonomi agar warga nyata hijrah ke kota。
我的名字是雅妮，我从印尼来。
我是印尼来快5年了，做工厂。
我是印尼人。
我来4年，我在这里照顾阿妈。
我名叫麦基迪，就工匠嘛。
在这里很像印尼的，在这很多印尼人，我会一起讲话，什么都可以，对，一起玩，比较很开心这样子。如果每天我们这工作很辛苦了，这样子很累，一个月一次休息跟朋友在这里一起玩这样子，比较好。
Tak begitu saja karena aku tak mau celaka. Asik.
吓到，原来这么多，当然没有很喜欢啊。因为我推车，我现在根本过不到对面去啊，因为都是人，服装啊、打扮啊，其实觉得很像在国外，不是在台北车站。
台湾就是需要他们的劳工，所以才会请他们来。我记得以前有驱离过他们几次了，但是成效不彰，因为他们会在外面闹事。
每个礼拜餐展用完哦，他们周边自己都会带的垃圾袋，都会安尼选去抓。其实我就是一个游民啦，人啊人一个，敢若一个异乡，一个，敢若毋是感情的感情，我要紧就是摕一个便利所在，互因来聚会啦，就是安尼啊。
所以你有支持吗？
这当然有哦，对，反正都感觉我走印尼去流浪。
Wahai Presiden kami yang baru, kamu harus dengar suara ini.
Semacam kayak anak desa.
Comment raconter une histoire de mémoire si la veine d'eau de l'ancien puits est coupée? La piscine pensée par les architectes remplacera sous peu le puits avec son eau vive et sa veine d'eau. Le sens du lieu. Que peut signifier la sauvegarde de la façade ancestrale de la maison sans tablette aux ancêtres? Comment peut-on préserver un ancien puits si on l'extirpe de son lieu d'origine, le coupe de sa veine d'eau et le rebâtit ailleurs? Relocalisé dans un coin du Gala, lieu situé dans le Wanwa du Sud, le vieux puits tente de poursuivre son histoire. Gala, dans le langage des Ketagalan, l'un des groupes autochtones de la plaine, signifie le pays du marais. Le nom de la région Gala est sans doute l'abréviation de Ketagalan. On nomme aujourd'hui le village au cœur de Gala Kwatao, terme qui se réfère littéralement au marais qui s'y trouvait jadis. Les Japonais l'identifient comme glissade d'eau sur leur carte géographique. Selon ces cartes anciennes, ce marais avait la forme d'un long et étroit filon qui s'étendait jusqu'à la rivière Sindienne. C'est sur ces rives que le premier village de la partie nord de Taïwan fut établi. Les gens ont accès à un sens de l'histoire de par l'environnement et l'architecture. Cela permet à la fois la prise de conscience identitaire et le développement de relations sociales favorables. La démolition de ces atouts physiques et culturels équivaut à nous enlever le droit d'interpréter nous-mêmes la mémoire collective. La pensée sociale de base, les images et la perspective historique de Taïwan semblent ainsi toujours chaotiques et contradictoires. Pour les autorités, l'authenticité du lieu n'est qu'une parure. La préservation historique est un outil permettant de créer un sentiment d'appartenance. Sur l'île de Taïwan, cela représente avant tout un véritable champ de bataille majeur pour les politiques culturelles d'aménagement. Pourquoi la plupart des gens semblent d'avis qu'il n'y a aucune nécessité de sauvegarder l'ancien puits sur son site original? Ne sommes-nous pas en train de désactiver les éléments clés de sa fonction narrative? Cela pourrait vouloir dire que tant du côté des camps politiques pro-Chine totalitaires que parmi les mouvements populaires démocratiques, on a soit mal interprété, soit tout simplement jamais porté attention à l'esprit d'authenticité ou au sens du lieu.
这回收的是弱势人的银行，现在一碗卤肉饭大概25到30块，每个人都吃得饱。只要回收有开，这些弱势的人，他不用偷不用抢，他们就有一个收入的来源，也不用任何的门槛，他们就可以赚钱，靠着替民众做回收来换取相对的价金，然后他们一天的生活就没有问题。在第一年50年啊，爸爸是叫我坚持搁做落去。
You know, sometimes I also do some musical pieces within Flaneur. Well, I haven't done that for a while, but I think for our second issue, I also did like some compositions based on my conversations there and based on different places. But yeah, that's the other part of the. That's the other part of my life, pretty much. Yeah. I don't know. You want to go up? Well, this is the old place where they made the bricks and like a half-destroyed part of the village. Let's say. I mean, there were more houses here, but they don't exist anymore. We can still see the ground, kind of the ground floors of it. But the project started 6 years ago. Already, yeah, 6 years. And well, it's a magazine which is dedicated, each issue is dedicated to one street. We started in Berlin, and then we went to Leipzig, Germany, and then we went to Montreal.
Yeah.
We did an issue in Montreal in 2014.
Okay.
On Rue Bernard in Outremont, Mailand area, and then we went to Rome and Athens, to Moscow, Sao Paulo, and the next issue will be in Taipei. So I came here. I spent all summer in Taipei, 3 months. And usually what we do is that we just get to a place and we start without much pre-research. So we start walking. And we start getting to know the place through the people we meet. So normally it's like you meet one person, and through that person you meet the next and the next and the next. And in a very short amount of time you get a certain idea of a map of the city, which is absolutely different to the one that you would get if you would be sitting on your desk doing the research. So it's very important to confront ourselves with the actual urban material rather than just knowing all the imagery before we come. So yeah, I came to Taipei, I stayed in Treasure Hill. This is why I suggested to meet here, because and I think through being in Treasure Hill, I started, because it's right next to the river, I started following the water a lot, following the river, following not just the water in a physical sense, but also the idea of the water. Because water is an important element for all cities and also for all modern cities, but the modern city usually hides the water, or has a relationship with the water which is less obvious. The water is either hidden under the pavement or hidden behind the dike. Most people are not aware of the water so much. But still, to understand what is the place, it remains very important. And so I ended up in Wanhua because of that. Because if you follow the river here, you end up in Wanhua, and you end up where this city started. Because that was the first harbor, and that was the first urban area.
But why Wanda Road?
Well, the north part, I mean, so we are taking Kanding Road and Wanda Road. So actually this is like two street names, but is one line through Wanhua. Kanding Road in the north, Manga area of Wanhua, is the origin of the city. So we're talking about a very old fabric. We're talking about the old temples, the harbor, which doesn't exist anymore, but the relationship with the water is very obvious. So it's a place of trade, it's a place of worship, it's a place of many old families and old conflicts. And then Wanda Road, the extension, is completely different, because the north was planned during the Japanese colonial period. So we have a modern city which is coming from an ideal sense of the modern city, like the grid and all the ideas of the Japanese are very obvious, the railroad, etc. The south, Gala area, where we have the part which is called Wanda Road, is different because it is a recent urbanization. The area until the 60s was always flooded until they built the dikes. So only in the 70s Wanda Road was built in the sense of an urban road. So this is an area that until that time, until the 60s, was consisting of villages. And that's why it's a completely different urbanization. It means that the structure of the villages is still invisibly there. People in that area still know the villages. And I also think it is an interesting, it's a very different relationship with the water. So the north, the relationship is based on the trade. The south, it was always a fight against the water, because it is about flooding and it is about surviving in that setting. But it's also an interesting tangent, because it is the village and the city. It's a village structure, also socially speaking, which very fast became city. So the urban fabric is much more organic. It's like grew super fast. So it's something closer to New Taipei City, maybe. And I think it's interesting because also people perceive this area as the edge, like the end of the city, the dirty part, like the periphery. But the south of Wanda Road has the another function because it has the biggest market of Taipei. So most of the fruits, vegetables, and fish arrive there. And I think that in many ways, Wanhua is not the end of the city, but actually the gate to the city. The gate, because most of the goods arrive there. But also, in terms of migration from south of Taiwan, from the east of Taiwan, but also migration from Southeast Asia, a lot of people arriving in Taipei City first live in Wanhua.
Pourquoi sauvegarder? N'est-ce pas en chérissant les chandeliers du passé que jaillit l'espoir du futur? C'est le sens de la véritable existence et non la valeur abstraite du chemin. Pour faire face à cette controverse, je crains de devoir surpasser les conditions du cadre spatio-temporel actuel. Toute idée et revendication sont inévitablement limitées par leur époque. Par exemple, les États-Unis n'ont pas seulement emprunté la démocratie de la Grèce antique, ils ont aussi emprunté l'esclavagisme. La longue durée de la loi martiale est toujours une excuse pour l'incapacité des fonctionnaires. La préservation du patrimoine n'est pas seulement une question de moralité. Elle se réfère également aux moyens pratiques qu'il faut prendre pour accéder à une vie plus riche. Pour y arriver, le développement urbain doit être porteur de la mémoire de l'humanité.